And the number is staggering. 21.6%, their vote under law would be considered election fraud.
Hey guys, there's a really important election coming up in the USA. There's a lot at stake for all of us, not just in the USA, but across the world. Now, it's very controversial to get into so called election fraud. It's almost like a conspiracy theory these days, but we know how most of them turned out to be kind of accurate. So I won't prejudge, but I have a couple of guys here from United Sovereign Americans, a group that is pursuing the system to make it more integral or have integrity. So non-partisan, I believe, but I'll let you guys talk about it. So Harry and Marley Hornick, let's talk about United Sovereign Americans and what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Ivor. What we've done really is extraordinary and I believe unprecedented. What we've done is we've amassed a giant team of qualified and credentialed analysts and legal scholars and attorneys and data gurus and system developers, and we've created an audit team to look into what the state records as its official, records for what took place in our instance. What we audited was the 2022 midterm elections, which in the US are elections for members of Congress. And so the federal government is at stake in these outcomes, right? So this team did these extraordinary audits, and we were just looking for instances where we could identify that the control process that's supposed to secure the system had broken. And I'll give you a couple examples of how we measured that because no one had really measured it before. There was a lot of, you can read the litigation, there's a lot of chatter about, well, it could have done this or it could have been that, but no one ever measured it. So we looked into 20 state registration lists, which are federal documents protected as national critical infrastructure. And in these lists, which are only supposed to contain legally registered voters, we found 29 million facially invalid registrations. So these are just basically illegal registrations, unless the state has some other explanation for their presence. And out of these registrations, there's issues that we identified, like people who are registered to vote before they're born, people who are registered to vote after they participated in one or more federal elections, people with unique names like, dash, dash, asterisk, things like that, like just, odd characters existing inside of their numeric or alpha character names, all these problems. And then we measured the vote, right? So 10 million of these illegal registration records, they appear to be illegal, they voted equally to American citizens who are eligible and qualified to cast votes. Additionally, the states counted 2 million votes with no identified voter at all, according to their own data. And again, these are the official, like you can, take a spaceship out, get with Elon Musk and go out to Saturn and back. There's no other record. This is it. This is the one that says this is how the Congress of the United States of America is going to be represented this cycle. And the six
So,
trillion dollar budget of the American people is going to be dispersed by these individuals.
Hmm.
so when you look at the law specifically, so we basically looked at two things. We looked at the legal framework for how elections are supposed to be conducted. And the second thing we looked at was their own data. And of course, we did our data analysis, but the fact is it's all transparent. So when we talk about 29 million records that are not correct according to the law, we turn those over to the states. This isn't something that we've done in, some sort of dark corner of a basement somewhere. We've actually reported this data to the election officials, and then when they did nothing about it, we reported it to law enforcement. But the fact of the matter is, it's all out there. It's completely open public information, and anybody that's ever done any real auditing knows this, that in complex temporal streams with multiple intersections, and not to go too far into the weeds of my nonsense words, but the fact of the matter is it's extremely hard to hide all evidence of fraud. So the other thing that we might want to say about this is that This is just the baseline. It's what we can find. Some of the fraud, the election fraud, is actually hidden. They've pulled some of it off. So when we talk about 29 million voters improperly registered, 10 million voters that voted that are improperly registered, and people say it's just a clerical error. No, it's not. So when they come in, for instance, to vote and they show their ID, if they're in a state that requires ID, they now have an ID that doesn't agree with the registration. What are they supposed to do with that? Just wave their hands and say everything's okay? Is that the person that was properly registered, or is it actually a different person? I mean, there aren't too many Harry Howeries or Marley Hornicks, but there's a lot of John Smiths out there. And so if John Smith goes in with the wrong middle name or something like that, is that a legitimate problem or not? Are they at a different address or not? These are significant issues. And then we do three major, exposés, if you will, just recently. It's not just our scorecard with the 29 million problems and the 2 million voters or votes that don't have voters associated with them. We looked at what we call the election fraud report. What we did was we did a statistically valid sampling of 7 of our states that we've been looking at. And these states, what we did was a prevalence study, somewhat similar to what the NIH would do in trying to figure out how many people got sick with some disease. The fact of the matter is, we looked at, with a deep analysis, how many votes are actual election fraud as defined by the Department of Justice. And the number is staggering. 21.6% of these states, 21.6%, their vote under law would be considered election fraud. Now, what we talk about all the time is, do we think that it was, some sort of malicious act? I mean, the fact is, under the law, it is malice. So, unlike other areas of law, elections were supposed to be self-adjudicating. You're supposed to know that they're pristine from the very beginning. So what happens is they go ahead and allow these votes because somehow we've decided it's more important to enfranchise everybody than to have a valid measurement of who won. So this is the absurdity of the current situation, is that this kind of, double speak narrative that exists out there is that we're attacking the franchise of all of the people. It's not true at all. We want everybody to vote. The system has become so complex. The people are so poorly trained. They don't even know the legal requirements. And then they just wave their hands and say, well, we can't do anything else. We just got to go ahead. And then we do, in addition to the election fraud, we do something called horizontal analysis, but we also call it the vote washing analysis. We know that if there's actual malice around because of the complexity of the temporal streams and the intersection of the records of vote and voter, that it's extremely hard to reconcile all these. So what we look for, and we already had preliminary evidence of this, right? The anecdotal observations that, things like chain of custody information was missing, images were missing of ballots, and these things are very problematic. They shouldn't exist. So then what we do is we do an analysis, because if you're going to wipe out the record of the bad conduct, what are you going to do? You're going to have to change the information as it flows. And we knew that there's a tremendous amount of sloppiness in what they're doing. So then we look at, are there examples of these temporal, what I mean by over time, washing out the fraudulent record and replacing it with something that looks more reasonable? And the numbers are extremely troublesome. So when we
Yeah.
look at the total of the 2 million votes that are counted with no voter, the election results that have been changed from one result to another for individual voters, or the voter's been replaced, right? So somebody was shown as having voted and suddenly they're shown as not having voted, and it's now assigned to somebody else. These numbers are staggering.
Yeah,
In the
Carrie, can I give a couple of
Yes,
examples just
please.
so that people can, because it's very theoretical, but I think some concrete examples would help people understand what we're seeing in these records. I'm going to give an example from Ohio, an example from New York. In Ohio, they had a problem in Franklin County, which is where Columbus is, the city of Columbus, Ohio, the most populous city in the state of Ohio. They had a problem in the 2022 midterm. which is that every third vote they counted came from a person who was registered to vote on January 1st, somewhere between 1900 and 2023. So there is no one in the office on January 1st. So what Harry's talking about is the way that they have to manipulate different records so that they can move votes through registration records that they have flagged by these indicators into registration records that appear to be valid. And I'll give another example of this problem. And by the way, what did Ohio have to say about that? They called it a clerical error. So, a third of the votes counted in a congressional election, and they have dismissed their entire voting population and their rights. It's despicable. In New York, in 2020, they counted 338,000 more votes than they had a record of any voter participating in that election. They certified that as accurate and meeting the standard of reliability under the law. Now, what they had to do because the New York team was so adamant in reporting these issues and so effective statewide all over New York in getting people aware of this problem, and it's so on its face, it's so egregious. So what the state ended up doing, and we can't prove that this was a response, but it appears to be a response, was that they had 100 people who had double voted as of August 2021 in the 2020 election. In July of 2023, in the 2020 election, they had 250,000 people who had double voted. So they're adding, this is what Harry's talking about, temporal modification of these records. They're washing votes in and out in order to attempt to reconcile. It's like I don't know. I have this
They
image
literally
that I
didn't think anybody. They didn't think anybody was watching, and so
Ah,
they create 250,000 double votes. These are in duplicates.
and they
That
didn't
so,
wow.
so
exist prior. But the registration records, because you can watch this record over time, the unique statewide identifier, the unique name. This is a particular voter. In 2021, they cast one vote. In 2023, they cast two votes. In 2020, like what the heck is that?
so
That
we
is
had.
what,
I'm sorry. We have millions of changes of the voting record associated with moving between citizens, moving from a citizen that probably isn't a real citizen into a citizen now that has duplicate votes because they don't know where else to shove it. It's kind of one of these movies where someone's trying to launder money, and what they do is they bury the bags in their backyard, right? Because they just have nowhere to put them. But
Yeah.
but when you look
It,
at it horizontally, all this stuff shows like a sore thumb. And in fact, the matter is we find this, and it's a baseline. It's only a baseline, but we find this mischief occurring between three dates: certification, the reconciliation or canvas it's called, or and current date. So why would they be changing the voting record for 2020 in the summer of 2024? Because they're still
yeah, and that
washing. They're
uh,
yeah.
still
And
watching.
I want to add a couple things too, because this thing that Harry's talking about, the prevalence study that we did on these 7 states. First of all, these 7 states control 35% of the House of Representatives. So it's a huge deal. And he's talking about, yes, 21% of the vote overall can't be verified. It looks like it comes from completely fake records. But I want to go and hone in on one sliver of that. 5% of those voters cannot be found. They do not appear to exist at all. And that
wow.
is a huge issue because Congress says of an election that concerns members of Congress can have no more than 0.0008% of the vote counted in error. So 5% of the vote looks like it doesn't even track back to a real identity using the kinds of tools that debt collectors would use to find people not only
And
in
law
space but
enforcement,
in
by the way.
time, and law enforcement.
So these are astonishing numbers, and I can kind of tell by the way you're quoting them. it's authentic, and also all of this data comes from essentially government sources. It's not pulled from some third party who's putting together numbers based on some investigation. This is directly from the official record, right?
Correct.
Exactly. And their measurements. It's not
Well,
the prevalence study is statistical, but everything else is a direct measurement.
yeah, so and we've already talked beforehand. I mean, there's some smearing going on. I think in USA Today they did an article and they kind of trying to insinuate that you guys maybe have some partisanship, but the reality is you're non-partisan. This is all rigid data analysis to get the system fixed for everyone's benefit. But I think offline, perhaps it was yourself, Harry, you were saying that in a twisted way, the system being chaotically in a mess like it is, clearly, it kind of suits everyone. So both sides of the house are happy enough to not fix this. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
So everybody that's in office today, on the Republican side, the Democrat side, and some manner of independent or Green Party candidate, every single one of them was put there by the current mess, just to be clear. So, but the law is also clear that there's a problem in the United States with elections between 1865 and 1888. It's a disaster, actually. They call the carpetbaggers in the South. You have all sorts of, attempts to disenfranchise people from voting. And so they basically make a decision in 1888 that says election officials do not have the right to hide behind ignorance or lack of knowledge of the law. I know that sounds like ignorance, but I'm talking about whether or not they know how to run an election or whether they know what the legal requirements are. It is also election fraud. So we have the controversy about, that everybody wants to call us conspiracy theorists. It has nothing to do with conspiracy. It has to do with a Supreme Court ruling in 1888 that says election officials have to run fair elections or they are guilty of malice, election fraud. It's what's defined to be election fraud. The trouble is when they talk about it in the press, they talk about financial fraud, they talk about bank fraud, they talk about securities fraud. They're not talking about election fraud because the definition of election fraud is extremely broad. The reason that the machines have to have a 0.0008% accuracy rate is that the desire by the government was to never have to adjudicate. But then they throw it out completely. The nonsensical statements from the state's secretaries of state and the election officials are, well, we can't meet that kind of requirement. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if your bank statement came back with a 21.6% error rate in it? I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous. Or your
I want
credit
to add,
card statement.
yeah, I want to add some ideas also because it's so easy. We get drowned into the outcome of elections and we forget why we have elections really at the root, which is because in America, we're supposed to have the law as the king. That's what was decided. No single human being would ever have the ability to maintain a moral, integrity for such a to hold that kind of power and never abuse it. So the law would be the king. Now you have all these political factions, adversarial factions with fundamentally opposing perspectives on what's right for society, living neighbor by neighbor in America, right? So how do you keep that system into a structure where everyone is participating, where the democratic process actually benefits from all of that diversity of thought, which is what the founders knew was possible. They dreamed it and they built it. And it's because the elections are impeccable. It's a zero trust process. And this is what the progressive religion tries to throw shade all over. That if you don't trust us, it's because you're a bad person for whatever reason, whatever ism they want to slap on you. You're a bad person because you don't believe that I'm doing the right thing just because I say so. The zero trust system says, hey, in America, we don't have to trust anybody when it comes to elections. I don't trust you. You don't trust me. We're adversaries. The only way we trust the outcome, and this is why this ruling exists, is that the election officials never wavered from the law. And that's what that Supreme Court decision says. It says if they waver from the law, there's only one reason.
Yeah,
Malice,
and
evil. They use the word evil.
yeah. Well, the conspiracy theorist slur, which is all it is, and it's essentially a form of psyop because investigative journalism 30, 40 years ago, remember Watergate and all, investigative journalism was appreciated. But now investigative journalism largely is smeared as conspiracy theory now. It's a complete inversion of logic. So it's totally insane. But these crazy numbers and this rotten system, I mean, a system that broken, it's kind of like a black hole gravitational field to pull in people who want to do real fraud, you know, within a system that's not coherent and is not locked down to 0.0008. It's a playground for people who want to play fraud around the edges, I guess.
It's a
It's
playground for
noise
people whose
injected to hide the mischief. So
their
Yes.
ambition is no longer tied to a moral structure or a structure based on the principle of individual liberty. Their ambition is now untethered. And you're
Yeah.
right. The kind of people who are attracted to that are not the people that you want to have running your election systems or your government.
No, and it's like, since when was censorship ever carried out by good guys, right? Never. So people who like rotten systems, just in, they're never going to be the right type of people you want to trust. And the authorities, when you present them with this data from their own official databases, they literally say, "Oh, they're just clerical errors." I mean, I guess they know that that's absurd, but they figure we'll just say it and we'll just brush it under the carpet, and hopefully these guys like you investigating will just go away. Is that what they're thinking?
Well,
that's
there
certainly
actually there's a legal term for it. It's called acting under color of law. And thankfully, there is a legal remedy for that problem that the citizens can avail ourselves of if we're savvy enough and educated enough to do so. Because after the Civil War, there was so much egregious violence, and the Congress came up with a mechanism for citizens to protect themselves against corrupted officials and their corrupted actions. And it basically, you can sue these officials, and especially regarding a right that is protected inside of Article 1 of the United States Constitution, the right to choose representatives. These officials are stripped of their immunity and they can be sued personally
Mm.
against their own assets for deprivation of civil rights acting under color of law. And one of the reasons that you start to see activity among these officials now, for example, the state of Oregon just suddenly shut down their link between the Department of Motor Vehicles and their voter registration system. They said, "Oh, you know what? We need to investigate this. We need a third party investigator." Yeah, you do. And you see other
a
you
little
see
late.
other secretaries of state saying, "Oh, we're hiring a we're starting a legal defense fund." They're claiming they're raising assets under the cloak of their authority. They're raising money for their own defense funds because they know this opportunity is going to be used. We keep saying we're not private about it. I mean, people need to know that there is a way to hold others accountable, to hold these officials accountable, and we have to have the, as the founders called it, we have to have the manly firmness to do it because our country is on the line. And when America falls, were that ever to happen, where in creation, where in the rest of the world is there a bastion of liberty that everyone else can leverage off of to keep improving their own structures?
Yeah, and awareness for me, this one, well, the stakes here are enormous because where America goes, I mean, the Western world will end up following, and we have a lot of headwinds with all the madness, especially since 2020, and this progressive kind of lunacy in my mind, and all the things that are going on. We're teetering on the edge of the abyss, I think. So, in terms of awareness, what do you guys need most? I'm guessing you need people to get on board, to follow, to link up with your endeavor, perhaps assist in various ways? Is that what you guys need more than anything? Because you've got a handle on the data, you just need to broaden the number of people who are taking an interest in this crucial arena.
That's
So
basically it. Yes.
yeah,
Go
we
ahead,
need
Gary.
people. Yeah, we need two things. We need people's time. We need their treasure. We talk about it all the time. All of our people are volunteers except our lawyers. So we have to pay the lawyers. So if we want to take this fight to the places that it needs to go, we have to have money. The other thing is that there are thousands of issues. I mean, they've attacked the integrity of the voting system so broadly that we need people in every state to stand up and say it's enough, and let's resolve, step by step. The elephant needs to be eaten one bite at a time. We have to go after this massive, the thing I use is the description of the Gordian knot. I think we have Alexander's sword to cut the Gordian knot loose, but we have to fix the system so that it isn't, just going to return to an unstable state. And we're in an unstable state right now. And as we said before, we have to come to the realization that at least at some level, everybody is involved. I mean, we have, maybe not, conscious decisions, but if you have a corrupt area in a uncorrupted state, how do you deal with that? Is that enough to fight the whole state's outcome, or do you fight the area of corruption? We have to stop looking the other way, and the people have to investigate, what's happening in their own areas. There's thousands of issues that have to be pursued, but right now we have to stay at the high level because the system itself is broken beyond recognition. We talk about, the national voter rolls as being a legal morass and broken beyond any recognition. It's just a mess. It's just a
Yeah.
mess.
We also,
So
yeah, we have a thread that we just posted over the weekend. We have a couple of maybe one or two more days that we're going to keep updating this thread, but most of the information is there that we've spoken about already. So if you go to our Twitter account or X account, that's at United S American. You can read that entire thread and you can help us to share that information. There's some really excellent graphs and charts and stuff there, real data you can dive into, get a handle on it for yourself, and then share it with all of your communities because, like Ivor said, the more people who know about this, the harder and harder it becomes for the state or any particular state to get away with these kind of actions against their citizens. We have to broadcast this information. So anything that you can do to help broadcast the message, anything you can do to help us to, pay for our attorneys. We have top tier constitutional attorneys with broad backgrounds in litigation all the way up to the Supreme Court. We have really an excellent effort all the way up and down. So any support you can give us is certainly appreciated.
yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. And I'm going to put the link to that thread. That sounds like a real, for busy people these days, a one stop shop to give a very broad view with graphs and data. I think, Harry, you mentioned there's a couple more links to deep dive reports for people to see the data for themselves firsthand. And yeah, I mean, it might have been Socrates or someone who said that the price people pay for a lack of engagement in politics is to be ruled by evil men. And this is where we are. The stakes are high. And this is something that has to get fixed. So kudos to you guys for getting together and getting some traction on this. I'll get this interview out very quickly because there's kind of a big election coming, I believe, in the USA pretty soon. And I'll get all the links you sent me and put them in the description box down below. So guys, get in there and help support the team. Everything or a lot of things are at stake for this one, right?
Absolutely, Ivor. I
Yes,
couldn't
there
agree
are.
more.
Great stuff. Well, thanks so much. And you packed a lot of information in there in a very short amount of time. And in these days of low attention spans, it's great to be able to do that. So great job. And we'll circle back maybe after the election and see how things are going.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys.